Crystal Vorthak stood near the large window in the ship's main hall. His thick green skin reflected the distant stars as he watched the human soldiers move around the deck below. They looked so small and weak compared to his own people. His sharp claws tapped against the metal rail as he studied them. The Vorthak warrior had lived for over 200 years. He had fought in countless battles across the galaxy. His people were known everywhere as the best fighters. Their thick skin could stop most weapons. Their claws could cut through steel. Their strength could crush bones with ease. No enemy had ever made a Vorthak warrior step back in fear. But these humans puzzled him. They had no natural armor like his kind. Their skin looked thin and soft. They had no claws or fangs. Their muscles seemed weak. Yet somehow these creatures had built ships that could travel between stars. They had weapons that could destroy planets. Most strange of all, other alien races spoke of humans with something that sounded almost like respect. Crixtal watched as a human female with short black hair checked her weapon. She was small, maybe half his size. Her name was Mi-Ray, according to the file he had read. She worked with explosives. The idea that such a tiny creature could handle dangerous bombs seemed almost funny to him. Near her stood a young human male, called Junwoo. He carried a long-range weapon and looked barely old enough to fight. His movements were careful and precise, but Crixtal could see no real strength in his thin arms. How could such a weak-looking being survive in real combat? The ship's announcement system crackled to life. All soldiers were called to the main briefing room. Crixtal moved through the corridors with long, powerful steps. His heavy footsteps echoed off the walls. Other aliens moved aside as he passed. This was normal. Most species showed respect to the Vorthak. But the humans did not move aside. They simply nodded at him as he passed, as if he were just another soldier. This strange behavior made Crixtal think. Either these humans were too stupid to understand what they faced, or they had some hidden strength he could not see. The briefing room was packed with soldiers from many different worlds. Crixtal took his place near the front. His size and presence made other aliens step back, giving him space. The humans, however, simply found seats where they could. They did not seem worried about being close to larger, more dangerous-looking aliens. The mission commander, a tall alien with blue skin, stepped forward. Behind him, a huge screen showed images that made several soldiers shift uncomfortably. The pictures showed destroyed planets, empty cities, and worst of all, the creatures that had caused all this damage, the Devourers. Crixtal had heard stories about them, but seeing the images was different. They looked like giant insects, but wrong somehow. Their bodies were black and shiny. They had too many legs, too many teeth, and eyes that seemed to hold nothing but hunger. These creatures ate everything living they found. They consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing behind but dead rock. "The target is a Devourer hive ship," the commander said. His voice was steady, but Crixtal could smell fear in the air from many of the other soldiers. "Intelligence reports show it contains billions of these creatures. They are heading toward the Kepler system, where over 40 billion people live across 12 planets." The screen showed the hive ship itself. It was massive, easily the size of a small moon. Its surface was covered in holes and spikes. It looked alive somehow, like a giant organism floating through space. Dark shapes moved across its surface, millions of Devourers crawling over their ship like ants on a hill. "This will be a boarding action," the commander continued. "We must get inside the ship and destroy it from within. The mission will be dangerous. Many of you will not return." Crixtal felt his blood grow hot with excitement. This was real combat, the kind his people lived for. He looked around at the other soldiers to see their reactions. Most showed fear or worry. Their scents betrayed their emotions even when their faces did not. But the humans were different. They sat quietly, studying the images on the screen. They asked practical questions about the ship's layout, about Devourer weaknesses, about their own equipment. They showed no fear that Crixtal could detect. Instead, they seemed to be planning, thinking, preparing. When the briefing ended, the soldiers began to leave. Crixtal was studying the tactical displays when he felt someone approach. He turned to see one of the humans standing nearby. This one was older than the others, with gray touches in his black hair. His file had said his name was Dae-ho, and he led the human squad. "You are Krixtal Vorthak," the human said. It was not a question. His voice was calm and steady. "I am," Krixtal replied. He looked down at the human, who barely reached his chest. "You are Captain Dae-ho." The human nodded and extended his hand. Krixtal had learned about this human custom. He reached out with his own large clawed hand and grasped the human's smaller one. He expected to feel fragile bones that might break easily. Instead, the human's grip was firm and strong, not as strong as a Vorthak, but much stronger than Krixtal had expected. "I wanted to meet you before the mission," Dae-ho said. "My people have heard many stories about Vorthak warriors. They say you are the best fighters in the galaxy." Krixtal felt pleased at this recognition. "We are. My people have never known defeat in honest combat. We will destroy these devourers easily." Something flickered in the human's eyes for just a moment. It was gone so quickly that Krixtal almost missed it, but for just an instant he thought he saw something deep and dark, like looking into a cave that went down much further than anyone could see. "I am sure we will work well together," Dae-ho said. His voice remained pleasant and calm. "My team is experienced. We have fought difficult enemies before." "What enemies could challenge humans?" Krixtal asked. He did not mean to insult, but he was genuinely curious. "Your people seem soft, peaceful." Dae-ho smiled, but the expression did not reach his eyes. "Appearances can be misleading. We have learned to adapt to whatever we face." The human captain turned to leave, then stopped. "Krixtal, may I give you some advice?" The Vorthak warrior tilted his head. It was unusual for prey species to offer advice to predators, but these humans continued to surprise him. "When we board that ship," Dae-ho said quietly, "stay close to my team. The Devourers are not like other enemies. They use fear as a weapon. They try to break your mind before they break your body." Krixtal almost laughed. "I am Vorthak. We do not know fear." Dae-ho studied him for a long moment. "No," he said finally. "I suppose you do not. Not yet." The human walked away, leaving Krixtal standing alone with those strange words echoing in his mind. Not yet? What did that mean? Later in his quarters, Krixtal prepared his weapons and armor. His claws were sharp enough to cut through most materials. His natural armor could stop small weapons fire. His strength could overpower almost any enemy in close combat. He had everything he needed to destroy the Devourers. But something about his conversation with the human captain bothered him. There had been something in Dae-ho's voice, something in his eyes. It was as if the human knew something that Krixtal did not. Something important. Krixtal pushed the thought away. Humans were weak creatures who used tools and tricks to make up for their natural limitations. When the real fighting started, they would hide behind their weapons while warriors like him did the actual work. The ship's engines changed pitch, indicating they were approaching their target. Soon, Krixtal would show these humans what real combat looked like. He would protect them, as a strong warrior should protect the weak. And when the battle was over, they would understand why the Vorthak were respected throughout the galaxy. As he checked his equipment one final time, Krixtal felt the familiar excitement of approaching battle. He was eager to face these Devourers and show them the fury of a true warrior. Whatever tricks they used to frighten other species would not work on him. He had no way of knowing that soon. Everything he believed about strength, fear, and what it meant to be human would be turned upside down. The lesson he was about to learn would stay with him for the rest of his very long life. The battle was coming, and with it, revelations that would shake him to his core. The boarding pods launched from the main ship with violent force. Krixtal gripped his restraints as the small craft shook and spun through space toward the massive hive ship. Around him, the mixed squad of aliens and humans prepared for battle, in their own ways. The Vorthak warrior watched the humans with continued puzzlement. While other aliens checked their armor multiple times or muttered prayers to various gods, The humans sat quietly. They moved with calm efficiency, checking weapons and equipment without any wasted motion. Mi-Ray hummed softly under her breath as she arranged her explosive charges. Junwoo cleaned his rifle's scope with careful attention to detail. Most strange of all was their medic, Young-Soo. He prepared medical supplies while reading what looked like technical manuals on his small screen. Occasionally, he would nod, as if confirming something important. When Crixtal managed to glimpse the screen, he saw detailed anatomical diagrams of various alien species, including devourers. "Impact in 30 seconds, announced the pod's pilot. Crixtal felt his muscles, tense with anticipation. This was what he lived for. Honest combat against a worthy enemy. His claws extended automatically, and his thick hide seemed to grow even tougher as his body prepared for battle. The pod struck the hive ship's hull with tremendous force. Metal screamed as the cutting charges burned through the alien ship's outer layers. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as the boarding door exploded outward. Crixtal was first through the breach, as was proper for a warrior of his caliber. He landed heavily in a corridor that seemed to pulse with organic life. The walls were a sickly gray-green color, covered in what looked like veins. The air was thick and humid, carrying a smell that made his nostrils burn. Immediately, the devourers attacked. They came from all directions, crawling from holes in the walls, dropping from the ceiling, emerging from hidden passages. They were exactly as horrible as the briefing images had shown, but seeing them in person was much worse. Their black, shiny bodies reflected the red emergency lights. Their multiple legs clicked against the floor as they moved. Worst of all were their faces, if they could be called faces. Multiple eyes stared with mindless hunger and their mouths opened to reveal rows of sharp teeth. Crixtal roared with battle joy and threw himself at the nearest group. His claws ripped through their armor-like shells with satisfying ease. His powerful legs drove him forward, trampling smaller devourers under his weight. This was exactly what he had expected, a straightforward fight where his natural advantages would win the day. Behind him, he heard the humans' weapons firing. The sharp crack of their rifles echoed through the corridor. He assumed they were hanging back, using their long-range weapons to avoid close combat. This was smart, given their physical limitations. Let the real warrior handle the dangerous work. For the first few minutes, everything went exactly as Crixtal had predicted. His superior strength and natural armor made him nearly unstoppable. Devourers fell before him like wheat before a harvester. His thick hide turned their claws and their acid attacks barely stained his skin. But then more devourers came. And still more. What had started as dozens became hundreds. They poured from every opening, every crack, every shadow. Crixtal found himself fighting harder just to maintain his position. His claws, while still deadly, began to show wear from constant use. His hide, though tough, started to show scratches and burns from repeated attacks. For the first time in his long life, Crixtal began to understand what it meant to be overwhelmed. He spun around to see how the humans were doing, expecting to find them retreating or calling for help. Instead, he saw something that made him pause even in the middle of combat. The humans had formed a tight defensive formation. They moved together like parts of a single organism, each one covering the other's weaknesses. Mi-Ray had set up some kind of portable barrier and was lobbing explosive charges into groups of devourers with deadly accuracy. Junwoo's rifle cracked steadily, and with each shot, a devourer's head exploded. Young-Soo moved between his teammates, treating injuries while somehow also fighting. And Captain Daeho stood in the center, coordinating their movements with hand signals and quiet words. His own weapon fired with mechanical precision, but Crixtal noticed that the human captain spent more time watching the battle than participating directly. What struck Crixtal most was their calmness. Despite being surrounded by nightmare creatures that wanted to eat them alive, the humans showed no panic. They treated this life-or-death battle like a job that needed to be completed efficiently. A massive devourer, larger than the others, burst from a side passage. This one was different. Its armor was thicker, its claws longer, and its eyes showed an intelligence that the smaller ones lacked. A broodmother, according to the briefing files. These creatures commanded the smaller devourers and were far more dangerous. The broodmother focused on Mireille, perhaps sensing that her explosives made her the greatest threat. It charged toward her position with frightening speed. Crixtal tried to intercept it, but smaller devourers blocked his path. He watched in horror as the massive creature bore down on the small human female. Mireille saw it coming. She had time to run, time to call for help, time to take cover behind her barrier. Instead, she did something that made Crixtal's blood turn cold. She grabbed one of her largest explosive charges and armed it. Then she stood up, fully exposing herself to the charging monster. As the broodmother leaped toward her, jaws wide, enough to bite her in half, Mireille smiled. "Come on then," she said in her own language, though Crixtal somehow understood the meaning. The explosion was tremendous. It killed the broodmother instantly and sent smaller devourers flying in all directions. But Mireille had been right at the center of the blast. When the smoke cleared, Crixtal saw her lying against a wall, her armor cracked and blood running from multiple wounds. Crixtal fought his way to her side, expecting to find her dying or at least screaming in pain. Instead, she was trying to sit up, and there was a satisfied expression on her face. "Did I get it?" she asked weakly. "You got it," Youngsu replied, already working on her injuries. "Nice work." "Good," Mireille said, and then she actually smiled. "That was fun." "Fun?" Crixtal stared at her in disbelief. She had just willingly blown herself up to kill an enemy, and she called it fun. Youngsu worked on Mireille's wounds with incredible efficiency. His hands moved with the skill of someone who had done this many times before. As he worked, he spoke to her in calm, conversational tones. "The charge was perfectly placed," he said. "You got the blast angle just right to channel most of the force away from yourself. Smart thinking." "Had to be sure," Mireille replied through gritted teeth. "Couldn't let that thing reach the others." Crixtal helped Youngsu carry Mireille to a more defensible position. As they moved, the medic continued his work, but Crixtal noticed something odd. Youngsu's medical supplies included instruments that seemed designed for more than just healing. Some looked almost like torture devices, though they were clearly marked as surgical tools. "Youngsu," Crixtal said carefully, "what kind of enemies have you fought before?" The human medic looked up from his work. For just a moment, his pleasant expression slipped, and Crixtal saw something cold and clinical in his eyes. "Many kinds," Youngsu said simply. "We learned long ago that to defeat an enemy, you must understand them completely. Sometimes that requires detailed study." The way he said detailed study made Crixtal's skin crawl. There was something in the human's tone that suggested this study might not always be done on willing subjects. Around them, the battle continued. More devourers poured into the corridor, but now Crixtal noticed something different about how the humans fought. They were not just defending themselves, they were learning. With each attack, their responses became more efficient. They began anticipating the devourers' movements, predicting their tactics. Junwoo, the young sniper, had started taking shots that seemed impossible. He would fire at devourers that were completely hidden behind cover, somehow knowing exactly where they would emerge. When Crixtal asked how he knew, Junwoo shrugged. "They are predictable," he said. "Like hunting animals back home. Once you understand their behavior patterns, you can be waiting for them." Captain Daeho appeared beside them, reloading his weapon with practiced ease. "How is she?" he asked, looking at Mireille. "I will live," she answered before Youngsu could respond. "Ready to continue?" Daeho nodded and looked at Crixtal. "We need to push deeper into the ship. Are you ready?" Crixtal looked around at the carnage. Dead devourers covered the floor, but he could hear more coming. Many more. His own body ached from the constant fighting, and he was beginning to tire, something that rarely happened to a Vorthak warrior. But the humans looked ready to continue. Despite their injuries, despite being surrounded by creatures designed to inspire terror, they showed no signs of wanting to retreat. "How do you do it?" Crixtal asked. "How do you stay so calm?" Daeho considered the question seriously. "Fear is information," he said finally. "It tells you that something dangerous is nearby. But once you acknowledge that information, fear has served its purpose. What matters then is what you choose to do with that knowledge. The deeper they went into the hive ship, the worse things became. The walls grew more organic, pulsing with a rhythm that reminded Krixtal of a massive heartbeat. Strange fluids dripped from the ceiling, and the air grew so thick it was hard to breathe. Worst of all was the smell, a combination of decay, acid, and something else that made every instinct in Krixtal's body scream danger. The Devourers had changed their tactics too. Instead of charging mindlessly, they began using coordinated attacks. They would strike from multiple directions at once, forcing the squad to split their attention. Some would attack from the front while others dropped from above or emerged from hidden tunnels. But it was more than just better tactics. The creatures had begun using psychological warfare. It started with sounds. As the squad moved through the twisting corridors, they heard voices calling to them. The voices spoke in different languages, sometimes in Galactic Standard, sometimes in the native tongues of the squad members. They called out names, pleaded for help, screamed in agony. Krixtal knew these were tricks. The Devourers were mimicking the voices of victims they had consumed, trying to confuse and distract the attackers. But knowing it was a trick did not make it any less disturbing. When he heard what sounded like his own brother calling his name, from somewhere in the walls, his steps faltered for just a moment. The humans, however, seemed completely unaffected by these sounds. If anything, they became more focused as the psychological attacks intensified. When Young-Soo heard a child's voice crying for help in what Krixtal assumed was the human language, the medic's expression did not change at all. He continued treating a wounded squad member as if nothing had happened. "Does it not bother you?" Krixtal asked him. Young-Soo looked up from his work. "Of course it bothers me," he said calmly. "But being bothered and being distracted are different things. The voice is not real. The wounded soldier in front of me is real. I focus on what is real." This simple statement struck Krixtal as profound. The humans acknowledged the psychological attack but chose not to let it control their actions. They seemed to have an unusual ability to separate their emotions from their decisions. As they pushed deeper, the Devourers escalated their efforts. They began releasing chemical compounds into the air, pheromones designed to trigger fear responses in most sentient species. Krixtal felt his body react despite his efforts to control it. His heart rate increased, his breathing became rapid, and an overwhelming urge to flee swept through him. Several other alien squad members began to panic. A four-armed Zentaran warrior, known for his courage, started firing wildly at shadows. Two reptilian soldiers from the Sectar Empire turned and tried to run back the way they had come. The fear pheromones were doing exactly what they were designed to do. But again, the humans seemed largely immune. They showed some physical signs of stress, faster breathing, dilated pupils, but their behavior remained controlled and purposeful. Captain Daeho even took time to help calm the panicking aliens, speaking to them in soothing tones while continuing to coordinate the squad's advance. "How are you resisting the chemicals?" Krixtal asked Junwoo, who was methodically picking off Devourers from a concealed position. The young sniper shrugged without taking his eye from his scope. "Fear is just chemistry," he said. "Your brain releases chemicals to make you afraid. Their chemicals do the same thing, but knowing that makes it easier to ignore." "Ignore fear?" Krixtal was amazed. "That is impossible." "Not ignore," Junwoo corrected, firing another precise shot. "Understand. Fear wants you to run or hide, but sometimes the dangerous thing is behind you, and running just gets you killed faster, so you learn to think past the fear." Krixtal pondered this as they continued their advance. The humans spoke of fear as if it were just another piece of battlefield information, useful but not controlling. This was completely different from how his own people viewed courage. Vorthak bravery came from not feeling fear in the first place. But human courage seemed to come from feeling fear and choosing to act despite it. They reached a larger chamber deep in the ship's core. Here, the organic nature of the hive ship was even more apparent. The walls breathed visibly and bioluminescent. Veins provided an eerie, pulsing light. In the center of the chamber stood something that made Krixtal's blood run cold. It was a devourer, but larger and more intelligent-looking than any they had encountered. Its head was elongated, with oversized eyes that seemed to hold actual intelligence rather than just hunger. This was a controller, a creature that directed the actions of other devourers through some form of psychic link. The moment they entered the chamber, the controller turned its attention to them. Krixtal felt something probe at his mind. Cold. Tendrils of thought trying to find weaknesses, fears, painful memories. The mental intrusion was so violent that he staggered and nearly fell. Around him, other squad members were also affected. Some began screaming as the controller forced them to relive their worst memories. Others stood frozen, their minds overwhelmed by artificially induced terror. The creature was not just attacking their bodies, it was attacking their very sanity. But, once again, the humans reacted differently. They definitely felt the mental attack. Krixtal could see the strain on their faces, the tension in their bodies. But instead of being paralyzed or driven mad, they seemed to grow colder, more focused. Their movements became more precise, more calculated. Mireille, despite her injuries from the earlier explosion, began setting up explosive charges around the chamber with mechanical efficiency. Her hands moved steadily even as her face showed the strain of resisting the controller's mental assault. Young-Soo drew out some of his medical instruments, the ones that had looked like torture devices. As Krixtal watched in horror, the medic began advancing on a smaller devourer that had been wounded in the fighting. His movements were methodical, clinical. "What are you doing?" Krixtal managed to ask through the mental pressure. "Research," Young-Soo replied calmly. He began using his instruments on the wounded devourer in ways that were clearly causing it pain. "The controller is connected to all the others. I want to see how that connection works." The controller seemed to realize what was happening. Its mental attack shifted, focusing more intensely on Young-Soo. But the human medic continued his work even as blood began to run from his nose from the psychic pressure. "Pain," Young-Soo said conversationally to the controller, "is a language that all living things understand. You use fear to hurt us, but we have learned to use pain very effectively too." Junwoo had found a position where he could see the controller clearly. But instead of taking the shot immediately, he waited. Krixtal realized the young sniper was studying the creature, learning its movement patterns even while under severe mental attack. "Fascinating," Junwoo murmured. "It thinks it is the predator here. It does not understand that it has made a mistake." "What mistake?" Krixtal asked. Junwoo smiled, and for the first time, Krixtal saw something in the young human's expression that made his scales crawl. "It revealed itself to us, now we know where it is." The sniper's rifle cracked. The shot was perfect, striking the controller in one of its large eyes. The creature screamed, not just with its voice, but with its mind. The psychic shriek was so intense that several aliens in the squad collapsed. But the shot had not killed the controller, only wounded it. The creature turned its full attention to Junwoo, and Krixtal watched the young human's body stiffen as the controller's mental attack focused on him like a laser. Instead of breaking under the assault, Junwoo began to speak. His voice was steady despite the blood now flowing from his ears. "You know what the problem with your species is?" he said to the controller. "You have forgotten what it means to be prey. You have been the hunters for so long that you do not recognize a more efficient predator when you see one." Captain Daeho stepped forward, his weapon trained on the controller, but he did not fire immediately. Instead, he began to speak in a calm, conversational tone. "We have fought creatures like you before," he said. "Not exactly like you, but close enough. On our world, we learned to deal with parasites very effectively. We studied them, understood them, and then we found ways to make them extinct. The controller's mental attacks grew more frantic, more desperate. But the humans seemed to be drawing strength from its fear, rather than being weakened by it. The thing about humans," Daeho continued, "is that we are very good at learning. Every species that has tried to hunt us has taught us something new, and we remember those lessons." Mireille's explosives were now in place. She looked to her captain for orders, her finger on the detonator. Despite the psychic assault that was making her body shake, her hand was steady. You made one critical error, Deho told the controller. You tried to use fear as a weapon against creatures who learned to master fear millions of years ago. You revealed your greatest strength to opponents who specialize in turning strengths into weaknesses. The controller seemed to realize that something had gone terribly wrong. Its mental attacks became more chaotic, more unfocused. For the first time since they had encountered it, Krixtal sensed something he had never expected to detect from. A devourer, fear. Real, genuine terror. The creature was afraid of the humans. The final descent to the ship's core was a nightmare that Krixtal would remember for the rest of his very long life. The organic corridors had become so twisted and alive that they seemed to writhe around the squad as they moved. Bioluminescent, veins pulsed with sickly light, and the walls themselves seemed to breathe with malevolent awareness. But it was not the ship itself that filled Krixtal with growing unease. It was watching the humans as they adapted to each new horror they encountered. When acid began dripping from the ceiling in increasing amounts, burning through most materials it touched, Young-Soo calmly collected samples in small containers. He studied the substance with scientific curiosity, while it ate holes in the floor around his feet. Interesting, he murmured, watching the acid work. Similar to what we encountered on Kepler Prime, but more concentrated. This suggests they have been refining their biological weapons. Kepler Prime? Krixtal asked. When did humans fight? There? Young-Soo looked up from his samples with that same cold, clinical expression Krixtal had seen before. 3 years ago. Different species, but they used similar tactics. We learned a lot from that encounter. The way he said, learned. A lot made Krixtal's stomach turn. There was something in the medic's tone that suggested the learning process had not been pleasant for the enemy. As they moved deeper, the devourers began using new tactics. They released spores into the air that were designed to cause hallucinations, in most species. Krixtal began seeing things that were not there, shadows moving when nothing cast them, faces in the walls, voices calling from empty spaces. Several alien squad members became completely disoriented. A brave Corvani warrior began shooting at his own teammates, convinced they were enemies. 2 others curled up in corners, overwhelmed by visions of their worst nightmares. But the humans moved through the hallucinogenic fog as if it were just another environmental hazard. They checked on their affected teammates, administered what medical aid they could, and continued with their mission. How do you resist it? Krixtal asked Mireille, who was setting charges despite the fact that reality seemed to be melting around them. Practice, she replied simply. This is not the first time we have dealt with mind-altering substances. We know the difference between what is real and what is not. How can you know? Mireille paused in her work and looked at him seriously. Pain is real. The mission is real. Everything else is just noise. They reached the ship's core as the hallucinogenic effects began to wear off. What they found there was beyond anything Krixtal had imagined in his worst nightmares. The Queen. She was enormous, easily the size of a small building. Her body was a grotesque fusion of insect and plant, with roots that extended deep into the ship's structure. Multiple eyes covered her head, each one larger than Krixtal's entire body. Her mouth was a gaping maw filled with teeth like spears. But worst of all was her mind. The moment they entered the chamber, Krixtal felt the full force of her psychic power wash over him. It was not like the controller's focused attack. This was pure, overwhelming terror projected at a level that could drive entire species insane. Krixtal fell to his knees, his mind flooded with visions of death, destruction, and hopelessness. He saw his homeworld burning, his people enslaved, everything he had ever cared about consumed by endless hunger. The fear was so intense that his body began to shut down, unable to process the emotional overload. Around him, the other alien squad members fared no better. Some lost consciousness entirely. Others began screaming and did not stop. The Queen's psychic assault was designed to break the will of any creature that dared to challenge her. But the humans stood. They were affected. Krixtal could see them struggling against the mental attack. Blood ran from their noses and ears. Their bodies shook with the effort of maintaining control. But they did not fall, did not break, did not run. Instead, they began to advance on the Queen. "Magnificent," Captain Deho said, his voice steady despite the psychic storm raging around them. "Look at her, team. See how she has adapted. The biological integration with the ship, the psychic amplification system, the redundant neural pathways, truly impressive evolution." He spoke as if he were observing an interesting specimen in a laboratory, rather than facing a creature that could kill them all with a thought. Young Su had drawn out more of his instruments, the ones that definitely looked like torture devices. Now that Crystal could see them clearly, the medic began approaching one of the Queen's root-like appendages with scientific curiosity. "I wonder," he said conversationally, "if the pain receptors are distributed throughout the root system or concentrated at the connection points. This will help us understand how to cause maximum discomfort with minimum effort." The Queen's psychic attack intensified, focusing on Young Su. But the human medic continued his work even as his body began to convulse from the mental assault. "Pain," he said to the Queen, his voice calm despite the blood now pouring from his eyes, "is an excellent teacher. It helps creatures learn what they should avoid. We are going to teach you some very important lessons." Junwoo had found a position where he could target the Queen's eyes, but instead of taking quick shots, he began a systematic campaign. One eye, then another, then another. Each shot was perfectly placed to cause maximum pain without killing the creature. "The eyes are connected to the brain," he explained to the screaming Queen as if giving a lecture. "Each one we destroy reduces your sensory input and increases your panic. Fear makes creatures stupid. We want you stupid." Mireille was placing her explosives with methodical precision, but not in places that would kill the Queen quickly. Instead, she was targeting nerve clusters and sensory organs. "These charges are designed to cause agony, not death," she told the creature as she worked. "We learned this technique from studying human history. My ancestors were very creative when it came to dealing with parasites, but it was Captain Deho who truly terrified Crystal." The human captain stood directly in front of the Queen, staring into her massive eyes without flinching. The psychic assault that had brought Crystal to his knees seemed to have no effect on him at all. "Do you know what you are?" he asked the Queen in a conversational tone. "You are a pest, a parasite, an infestation. On my world, we have dealt with billions of creatures like you. Some were insects that ate our crops. Some were bacteria that made us sick. Some were larger predators that hunted our children, the Yi." Queen's mental attacks became more frantic, more desperate, but Deho continued speaking as if discussing the weather. "The difference between you and them," he continued, "is that they were honest about what they were. They did not pretend to be intelligent. They did not try to justify their existence. They simply tried to survive, and we respected that, even as we exterminated them." Crystal watched in horror as the Queen, this creature that had paralyzed him with terror, began to show signs of genuine fear. Her massive body trembled. Her psychic attacks became unfocused and chaotic. "But you," Deho said, his voice growing colder, "you think you are special. You think your intelligence makes you more than just another parasite to be eliminated. You are wrong." The human captain raised his weapon and pointed it at the Queen's head, but he did not fire immediately. "My species has a saying," he told her. "When you hunt monsters, be careful that you do not become a monster yourself." "Do you know why we have that saying?" The Queen's mental screaming was so intense that several of the unconscious aliens began convulsing, but Deho seemed unaffected. "We have that saying because we know exactly how easy it is to become monsters. We know because we have done it before many times whenever something threatened our survival. The difference is that we choose when to become monsters, and we choose when to stop." Crystal realized with growing horror that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The Queen, a creature that had never known anything but dominance and power, was experiencing genuine terror for the first time in her existence. And the humans were the cause of that terror. "You wanted to make us afraid," Deho continued. "But you made a mistake. You revealed yourself to creatures who have spent millions of years learning to master fear. We do not just resist fear. We understand it completely. And now we are going to teach you what it feels like." The Queen's psychic voice rose to a shriek that seemed to shake the entire ship. But it was no longer an attack. It was a plea. She was begging for mercy from creatures she had intended to devour. Crixtal understood now why other species spoke of humans with such strange respect. They were not weak creatures who had somehow survived despite their limitations. They were apex predators who had learned to disguise their true nature behind a facade of civilization. When the mission required it, they could become something far more terrifying than any monster the galaxy had ever produced. They could become perfectly controlled, completely ruthless, absolutely efficient killers who never lost sight of their objectives or their humanity. As the Queen's screams echoed through the chamber, Crixtal finally understood what Captain Deho had meant when he said, "Not yet," about fear. The human had known that before this mission was over, Crixtal would learn what it truly meant to be afraid. And the thing that terrified him most was not the Queen. It was realizing that the humans were on his side. The Queen died slowly. Crixtal would never forget the sounds she made as the humans systematically destroyed her. It was not the quick, honorable death that warriors gave to worthy enemies. It was something clinical, methodical, and terrifyingly efficient. When it was finally over, the massive hive ship began shutting down around them. The organic walls stopped pulsing. The bioluminescent veins dimmed and went dark. Without the Queen's psychic control, the remaining devourers throughout the ship became mindless and began attacking each other. But what disturbed Crixtal most was how quickly the humans returned to normal. As soon as the Queen's death was confirmed, the cold efficiency disappeared from their faces. Young Su immediately began treating the injured aliens with gentle care. Mireille helped carry unconscious squad members toward the extraction point while humming the same soft tune she had hummed. Before the battle, Junwoo carefully cleaned his rifle and asked if anyone needed water. It was as if the creatures who had just tortured a sentient being to death had never existed. In their place were the same pleasant, helpful humans Crixtal had met at the beginning of the mission. Captain Deho appeared beside him as they made their way through the dying ship. "Are you injured?" he asked with what seemed like genuine concern. Crixtal stared at him. This was the same human who had just calmly explained to a terrified creature exactly how her species would be exterminated. Now he was asking about scraped scales with the caring tone of a friend. "I am not injured," Crixtal said carefully. "But I am confused." Deho tilted his head. "About what?" "About you. About all of you." Crixtal gestured toward the other humans. "What I saw back there, that was not the behavior of the creatures I thought I knew." Deho was quiet for a moment as they walked through corridors that were rapidly becoming cold and dead. "What did you think you knew about us?" "I thought you were weak, fragile, in need of protection." Crixtal's claws scraped against the metal floor as they walked. "I was wrong, was I not?" "No," Deho said, surprising him. "You were not wrong. We are fragile. We do break easily. We need protection from many things. But then how? Being fragile is not the same as being weak," Deho explained. "Being in need of protection is not the same as being helpless. We learned long ago that survival is not about being the strongest or the most dangerous. It is about being the most adaptable." They reached the extraction point where other squads were gathering. Crixtal saw humans from other teams helping wounded aliens, sharing medical supplies, offering comfort to those who had been traumatized by the Queen's psychic attacks. They seemed like completely different creatures from the ones he had witnessed in the core chamber. "I do not understand," Crixtal said. "How can you change so completely? How can you be both kind and—" "What I saw." Young Su overheard the question as he finished treating an injured Zentaran warrior. "It is not that complicated," he said with a smile. "We simply choose which part of ourselves to use based on what the situation requires." "Choose?" Crixtal was amazed. "You can choose to become monsters?" "We can choose to become whatever we need to become," Mireille said from where she was helping. "Load wounded aliens onto transport stretchers. The trick is remembering to choose to become human again when the job is done." As they waited for extraction, Krixtal found himself studying the humans with new eyes. They moved among the other aliens like shepherds tending their flocks, gentle, protective, caring. But now he knew what lay beneath that surface kindness. "Captain Deho," he said finally, "may I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "When you were dealing with the Queen, you seemed to feel nothing. No anger, no hatred, no satisfaction. How is that possible?" Deho considered the question seriously. "Anger makes you stupid," he said. "Hatred makes you careless. And taking satisfaction in necessary killing makes you lose sight of why you are killing in the first place. We learned to set those emotions aside when they would interfere with what needed to be done." "But you felt something," Krixtal pressed. "I could sense it." "Yes," Deho admitted. "I felt pity." Pity. Krixtal was shocked. "For that creature? She was what evolution made her," Deho explained. "She could not be anything else. In a way, she was innocent, just following her nature. But her nature made her a threat to billions of innocent lives. So she had to die, regardless of whether it was her fault." The extraction ships arrived, and the survivors began boarding. As Krixtal settled into his seat, he found himself next to Junwoo. The young sniper was looking out the window at the dying hive ship with a thoughtful expression. "Do you regret it?" Krixtal asked him. "What we did to the Queen?" Junwoo shook his head. "Regret is for when you had a choice. We did not have a choice. She would have consumed billions of lives if we had not stopped her. The only choice we had was how to stop her, and we chose the most efficient method. But the suffering you caused was necessary," Junwoo finished. "And we will carry the weight of that necessity for the rest of our lives. That is the price of being human. We can do terrible things when we must, but we never forget that they are terrible." As their ship pulled away from the hive ship, Krixtal watched it grow smaller in the distance. Soon, it would be just another piece of dead metal floating in space, its billions of inhabitants extinct. "Captain," he said to Deho, "what you said to the Queen about becoming monsters, was that true? Can humans really choose to become something evil?" Deho was quiet for a long time before answering. "Every human carries the capacity for great evil," he said finally. "We carry the genetic memory of millions of years of survival, most of it spent as both predator and prey. We can become killers, torturers, destroyers, whatever survival requires. That is terrifying." "Yes," Deho agreed, "but we also carry the capacity for great good. We can be healers, protectors, builders, teachers. The terrifying part is not that we can become monsters. The terrifying part is that we get to choose which one we become." Krixtal thought about this during the long journey back to the fleet. When they finally docked with the main ship, he watched the humans say goodbye to their alien teammates. They shook hands, shared contact information, promised to meet again under better circumstances. They seemed genuinely fond of the creatures they had fought beside, but Krixtal knew he would never see them the same way again. Behind their friendly smiles and gentle words, he now knew there was something that could emerge when circumstances required it. Something that could look at a sentient being and calmly decide the most efficient way to destroy it. Later, in his quarters, Krixtal began writing his report. He knew his superiors would want details about the mission, about the humans' capabilities, about whether the alliance should continue. He wrote that the humans were indeed valuable allies. He wrote that they were effective fighters and reliable teammates. He wrote that the Vorthak Empire should maintain good relations with humanity. But he also wrote a personal recommendation that was classified at the highest levels. Under no circumstances should the Vorthak Empire ever consider humanity an enemy. Not because humans were strong in the traditional sense, not because they had superior weapons or better ships, but because they possessed something far more dangerous than any of those things. They possessed the ability to become exactly as monstrous as necessary to ensure their survival, while never losing sight of their ultimate goal of returning to their humanity. They were creatures who could stare into the abyss, understand it completely, and choose whether or not to stare back. As Krixtal finished his report, he realized that Captain Deho had been right about fear being information. The information he had learned was simple. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy or the toughest or the most naturally dangerous. But they might very well be the most terrifying, precisely because they chose not to be monsters, unless they had no other choice. And when they did make that choice, they made it with the calm efficiency of creatures who had learned exactly how to survive in a universe that wanted to kill them. Krixtal sealed his report and sent it to his superiors. Then he lay down to sleep, knowing that his dreams would be filled with the memory of gentle creatures who could become perfect killers without losing a single moment of sleep over the necessity. The alliance with humanity would continue, and that was good for both species. But Krixtal would spend the rest of his life grateful that humans had chosen to be their friends rather than their enemies. Because now he knew what it looked like when humans decided to solve a problem permanently. And he never wanted to be on the receiving end of that solution.